to Foyle's Charing Cross Road. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction, and thank you to Foyles and everybody who works here for helping put this on. And if it could be 10 more seconds to do a few more thank yous to Tom Hazelby, my editor at Verso, who's made the book readable, and also my other editors, my brother Tim, who's also helped make it readable. And thanks to Claire and Len for joining me this evening, and thank you all for coming. The book is dedicated to two people who passed away in 2020. I just want to take a moment to think about who are friends of mine, David Graeber and Leo Panitch, who both came from very different traditions on the left. They're both sort of dissident North American Jews who with good senses of humour, but they came from very different political traditions, and I hope that some of those differences, they're both creative and non-dogmatic. I hope some of that is in the book, and hopefully lots of that is in our discussion this evening. This evening I'll talk for a little bit about what's in the book, and then try to bring it more into the present moment, so we're discussing less what's happened before and less any of the sort of theory or whatever that's in the book. You can all read that yourselves if you'd like. If you would like, that would be very nice. But more about what we can do in this particular moment as the cost of living crisis rips, and as the reality of climate breakdown is pretty much undeniable for anyone. So I hope to focus the discussion more around that. So I'll start with just why I wrote the book and the headlines of what's in it, and then we'll move on. So I wrote the book, I think because, well, I was certainly depressed, and I think lots of people across the left were pretty depressed after the Jeremy Corbyn's defeat, Labour's defeat, our defeat in 2019. But I feel that the scale of how miserable we felt was disproportionate to actually the state of progressive forces in the country. It's not like people, the majority of the people in this country hate taxing the rich, or hate public ownership, or hate spending money on public services, or hate paying people properly. In fact, there's a basic latent social democratic common sense. If you look at pretty much all polling, that's there. And our movements are way stronger than they were beforehand. You know, the last 4 years on record have seen increases in trade union membership, the first time that's happened in 40 years. We've had new movements like Extinction Rebellion just burst onto the scene and absolutely force up the agenda, climate breakdown. So the same thing with Black Lives Matter. We have much more potential to act, I think. So I wanted us to be, you know, less defeatist. There is actually a lot of hope around, even though we don't have the political vehicle that we had beforehand. And just a quick word on that political vehicle, on the Labour Party, because that seems to be most of what the debate, I suppose, on the left has been, or a lot of it has been in the last 2 years. And at least judging by 2 reviews the book has had so far, the book's a bit of a Rorschach test for what you think about the Labour Party, apparently. You know, if you think the Labour Party is the best thing that's ever existed, and then apparently the book hates the Labour Party. If you think the Labour Party is the worst thing that's ever existed, apparently the book absolutely loves the Labour Party. Obviously, it doesn't do either. I think the question of whether it's going to be the Labour Party or not puts the cart before the horse. It's asking the wrong bit of the theory, because we had the leadership of the Labour Party under Jeremy, and we were insufficiently strong. We had insufficiently strong social forces to ultimately to win. So I think we should look at the question the other way around and see how could we strengthen progressive forces. So that's the social movements, the trade unions, the campaign groups, the organisations, the community groups that can come together to push for some type of progressive change. That's basically what the book is an argument for. It's an argument to federate as much as possible, to bring together as much as possible all of the forces for good. Hello, Marley. All the all the four tenants unions fighting for tenants, trade unions fighting for workers, climate groups fighting for everybody, and so on, and so on and so forth. So, and hopefully this evening we can talk a bit about how how that's possible, and what are the ways in which we could actively do that in the next few months. Because I think it's very important the way in which that's done. One of the things that I think was great about the sort of Corbyn period was that it took people on the left out of where we can sometimes be self-marginalising and minoritarian. And I think the prospect of entering government and trying to build a majoritarian project was very constructive. And I think we need to keep that in sight as we bring together our different movements, and also not forget that ultimately we do want state power. We do need to have state power. There isn't a path through the current issues that doesn't run through at some point the state. Now, that I think is you can see that in two incredibly clear ways. In the pandemic, obviously, states decided in some ways, whose livelihoods carried on, who stopped, who lived, who died, but also who got fabulously rich. In 2020, when we were all stuck at home and people couldn't work and the global economy was shrinking, the wealth of billionaires on the planet went up by 50%. 50%. The economy was tanking, but their wealth went up by 50%. And why is that? Because they control states. The four big central banks produced $9 trillion of liquidity, which predominantly went to propping up the asset prices, propping up the wealth, inflating the wealth of people who already had it, and doing very little for everyone else. There's no path to deal with that problem without state power. And the other, I think, more crucial, more civilizationally existential reason why we need to have a strategy which looks at state power is climate breakdown. The scale and speed of the transition that we need to make in almost every aspect of our society, every aspect of our economy and our energy system can't be done without using the state, without having some kind of government power. So I think we need to be open to having a political moment that provides us with a vehicle to win state power. So, okay, enough of that. I want to come to the current moment because this is more interesting. This is what we can all possibly do together. So, right now things are very difficult for a great number of people, but there's one thing that is positive, I think, about the current moment, which is everybody can see what's going on. Really, on the left, far too often we think that we're clever and we know what's going on, but other people don't know what's going on. Actually, they always did know what's going on, but now really everyone knows what's going on. Because everyone can see their bills are going up, the wealth of the billionaires is going up, their grocery shopping is going up, the amount of CO2 pumped into the atmosphere is going up, but their pay is going down. Everyone's pay in real terms, pretty much everyone in the country's pay in real terms is going down. And that provides, I think, the basis for very broad-based, unifying campaigns, bringing together people that represent all sorts of different groups in society towards hopefully some kind of autumn of action, where people are doing the four things that people have always done in difficult situations to resist power against them, which are withdrawing their labour, going on strike, not paying things, boycotting things, occupying places, being in places where they're not meant to be and not leaving, and the fourth, supporting each other, mutual aid and solidarity. And I think, I hope and I think that over the course of this autumn and this winter and into the spring, we're going to see those four things in a massive, massive number. And I think it's our task to try to unite those as much as possible, bring them together, and then leave ourselves open for what political moment and political vehicle that could create, because history moves very fast. It can move extremely fast, and we could be in a moment where that could be about to happen. And even if it's not, it's still our task to make that possible. So I'll just end this bit with yesterday was the 49th anniversary of the overthrow of the governor Salvador Allende in Chile. And on my way here, I saw a quote from him, which is the last thing that he said, which I thought was quite good, which was, "Much sooner than later, great avenues will again open through which will pass free people to construct a better society." And I think our task is to try to not just wait for the avenues to open, but to actively force them open and to be in a stronger position for when they are, so that we can charge through ourselves and bring everybody with us. Thanks very much. Now I'd like to pass to Claire Farrell to speak for a bit, and then Len will speak for a bit. We'll then chat for a bit, and then we'll open up for the floor and we can all speak together. Claire.
Thanks, James. Well, you know, we've been in a process of building a movement which we didn't think was going to work, which then did work, and then exploded in 2019, and then went nuts, and then we went into a global pandemic, which nobody really knew what to do with. And somehow, Extinction Rebellion has managed to carry on through that time. And now the Queen's dead, so we're also not on the streets this weekend just gone. And so all of these kind of like unexpected things keep happening. I think the thing that relates much to what James has just said, which is really important for people to hold in mind, is that we have left an era of stability and we have entered an unfolding era of unending instability. And people need to get real about that. And it really does need to be considered, like, when we're thinking about anything to do with society, to do with the way that we do business, to do with the way that we educate young people, to do with every aspect of everything. Because I feel that we've made some progress, and XR has been part of that, and the Fridays for Future moment was an enormous part of that. There was an enormous amount of serendipity around when our movement launched, actually, because we had a special report on 1.5 from the IPCC. We had a paper called the Hothouse Earth paper, which was talking about climate tipping points. There was a massive heat wave and fires and droughts in Europe in 2018. David Attenborough finally started talking in much more serious terms about the climate crisis. And so all of this stuff, and then Greta went on strike, and then boom. And we came as well at the same time with all of this stuff that was sort of pre-designed. We didn't just sort of, it didn't like come off a hashtag. It was actually quite a lot of it was like designed and preconceived. And I think that's why it still exists, where lots of things that would sort of appear to burst out into the world like that don't. But what we've been trying to get people to understand, and what I don't think many people understand, and I also don't think a lot of people understand who are thinking about left politics, is that now the world is a very, very unstable place. And that's not just geopolitically, as we're seeing right now. It's much more fundamental than that in terms of what's at stake with our food supply systems, the fact that the weather is unreliable, the fact that farmers in America are abandoning their farms, their cotton farms, they're going to claim on their insurance, right? So my background's in fashion. I was reading about this recently. It's amazing to me that the first report that's ever come out about the impact of climate change seriously on the cotton industry has just been released. Why? I don't know. I've been talking about it for a very long time. I know other people have too. But in terms of industry facing, the industry's only just going, oh shit, what's this going to do by 2040? And at the moment, like what's happening is the farmer's going to turn those crops back into the ground and they're going to claim on their insurance. At some point, you can't claim on your insurance anymore because you can't insure a farm that never fucking works. The same thing's going to happen with the food system. The same thing's going to happen with building insurance. There are like coastal cities right now where people are going, how much longer will we insure these basement apartments? Not very long. And these conversations are happening in the public space, but it feels to me that nobody's joining the dots on lots of them because they're happening in a place where somebody's talking about workers' rights, somebody's talking about the climate as if it's like an issue and not the actual operational function of the entire fucking world. there's all of these bits, and they need so badly to be joined up. And so what I felt was really like refreshing about reading James's book, first was it's short, so I can't read long books, and it's easy to understand, but it's also very pragmatic, and it's saying, look, you know, it's even ends with like this plurality of like ideas that says there could be this set of circumstances, there could be this set of circumstances, there could be this, and to me there's a good connection with like our third demand from Extinction Rebellion is for participatory democracy, which, you know, a lot of people on the left have criticised us for, because we're not saying this or that about socialism or about workers or about, you know, the specifics, because we've not gone into detail about that. We've said in a very simplistic way, we want to put a process that brings people together and that allows people with the best available information and with their knowledge about reality to be able to sort of come together and come to radical decisions, not because you've told them what to think, but because you've actually trusted that the majority of people are intelligent, they're good people, and they don't want to like collapse civilization or make billionaires richer, right? That's pretty obvious to me, and I do think that that's true. But like the pragmatism that is involved in having those kind of 4 different potential outcomes at the end of the book and saying this could happen, that could happen, that could happen, that could happen, I think is kind of where a lot of us have been trying to be at with the climate. Like everything's stacked against us. There's so many sort of pillars to look at. You can blame the media, you can blame the banks, you can blame the corporates, you can blame the government, you can blame all sorts of things. But until you manage to somehow hold some of that in around, you're not sort of able to fight with a strength, with a coherence. And so so I was really like happy to read something that said, well, we could do it like this with the Labour Party, or we could do it without the Labour Party, or we could do it like this with the movements, or less with the movements, more with the movements. But the point is to see the possibility. And I guess that's what we've been trying to be in the business of for the last few years. And my friend Jamie said to me, you know, the thing about being part of a social movement that sustains, that carries on, is that, you know, you have to be constantly willing to just look like an absolute idiot and just keep doing it and just keep going out and keep doing things that are embarrassing and keep getting things wrong and keep getting up and then going, oh, okay, we'll carry on then, you know. And there's a sort of, there's an element of that as well, the sort of like humility to say, well, there needs to be a range of options and we've got to keep reassessing as we go. And the changing conditions we're working in are going to definitely need us to keep reassessing things as we move, because things are moving so quickly with climate.
Len?
Well, first of all, James, thanks very much for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many people who are interested in a book that I think has been well written and has come out at an important time. Because James has made the point that the whole question of feeling low and defeated is a natural thing to happen. We went through a period where Jeremy Corbyn, in my opinion, changed politics in Britain for the better and possibly forever, because it raised the whole prospect of the fact that alternative policies, radical policies, are popular amongst the British public. And that is an important thing for us to remember. The right-wing media would have us believe that 2019 was a rejection of Corbynism. It was nothing of the kind. 2019 was about Brexit and only Brexit. I can prove that scientifically by pointing out that the Conservative Party won 44% of the vote and a landslide victory, saying 3 words, get Brexit done. You can't remember them saying anything else during the course of 2019. And people certainly in the red wall seats didn't vote for the Tories or reject Corbynism because they disagree with the public ownership of the energy companies or the railways or the abolition of zero-hour contracts. The media would like to banish from our minds 2017, when more people in England voted for Jeremy Corbyn than they voted for Tony Blair. So it's the role of the radical left to make certain that we don't allow them to expunge 2017 and the incredible movements around Jeremy Corbyn that existed from 2015 onwards. It's important for us to make certain that that remains foremost in our minds. The book, James reminds us of how important extra parliamentary action is so critical to a democratic society. And the call for a left bloc comes at a time when there is no left leadership within our movement. Nowhere is there anybody who people can look towards organisationally or individually to say that is our leader. Corbyn was an individual, and Corbynism, or as Jeremy would constantly tell us, not Corbynism but socialism, gathered around. And that's the task that we currently have, and that's why this book is effectively a clarion call to say that within our society at the moment, which I do think has changed from the old traditions, people are now more tuned in, even if it is only to a specific issue, which has wider connotations. And the clarion call is that all of us need to sometimes put aside some of the differences that we have, because most of the time there is enormous common ground amongst us. You know, the left, if the left are good at anything, it's disagreeing with each other. It's causing splits so that we don't have that unity that is required. James also talks about, and he said it tonight, he talks about it in his book, about the importance of state power. And it is true. If we are serious about making the advances and the changes for a better Britain, a better Europe, a better world, a more peaceful Europe and world, then state power, political power is important. And that's why a debate needs to take place about where we currently are in terms of the Labour Party. The Labour Party is the historical political party that millions and millions and millions of ordinary working people have voted for over the last 100 years. And we can't dismiss that. But I have a view that we are in a most perilous position than we've ever had. I think it's quite a sinister view. I'm going to take you back to 2017 when Theresa May called an election. Why did she call it? Well, she called it because she was being told that Corbyn and the Labour Party would be crushed and defeated in such a way that they would never ever recover. And then Jeremy and his team created this incredible movement that shocked the establishment. And I don't mean the right wing of the Labour Party, they're flotsam and jetsam. I'm talking about the real establishment. Can you imagine what happened when the opinion polls started to change? Can you imagine when they were sitting in their clubs or in their private rooms? They would have been saying to themselves, what the fuck is happening here? How have we allowed this to happen? How have we allowed a man like Corbyn, the very first individual spokesman of the Labour Party, who would have broken with the North Atlanticism that has ruled our party, would have recognised the state of Palestine, would have for the first time challenged the very power of the state? How have we allowed that to happen? You can imagine the calls that they would have got from their friends in America saying, what are you guys up to? How have you allowed this fella to come within this distance of power? And they will have made a decision to never, ever to allow that to happen again. They will have decided to destroy Corbyn as an individual, destroy Corbynism as an ideal, and destroy anybody who was close to Corbyn. They have set about their task in order to create a mirror image of the Democratic Party. If you go back 100 years to the beginning of the last century, was the Labour Party a socialist party? Well, the answer to that is it wasn't, but it had a very strong socialist trend, and it always has done, often referred to as the soul of the party, the heart of the party. And what is happening at the moment is the soul and heart of the party are slowly being attacked. Unlike the Blair years, the wilderness years that some of us call on the left, this is an attempt not just to marginalise the left, but to eliminate socialism, the socialist trend within the party. They've got a willing puppet like Starmer to do their business for them. I don't believe that Labour will win the next general election, and if they dispense of Starmer because they've finished with him, then someone like Rachel Reeves will take over. The very person, incidentally, that has said the loss of 200,000 people in the Labour Party is a price worth paying. The fact of the matter is that she would complete the task of destroying once and for all that socialist heart. And so we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. And I detected in James's book a parallel approach, something that I feel quite strongly about. Do we attempt to save the Labour Party as the political voice to obtain state power? Or do we concede that it is lost to us? Now, at the moment, I don't believe the Labour Party is lost to us, but I think it is on a very, very sharp, slippery slope. And in the events of that scenario happening, well, the other parallel thing that we should be considering is whether or not, just like our forefathers and mothers at the beginning of the last century, who suddenly sat down and said, you know what, we need our voice in a political arena. We're making gains in the industrial arena, but we're losing them in the political arena because we don't have a voice. The Liberal Democrats are not really our voice anymore. We need to sit down seriously and think about creating a new way of getting our voice in part. Now, that is a real possibility at the moment, which is why the concept of bringing groups of people together is so very, very important. Do you need a new political party first before you bring groups together? Or do you, as James argues, take the view that, well, actually, if you can establish a strong left radical group, then from that might emerge the concept of a new party? And that's really the issue that needs to be debated at the moment, because we are in retreat. James is right to say we shouldn't be too defeatist. I'm naturally an optimist. I'm naturally somebody who believes that something will happen. But it's only going to happen if good people involved in all of these issues engage in a debate. My view is that the trade union movement, organised labour, is critical in anything we do, whether it's saving the Labour Party or whether it's creating a new party. And therefore, I would ask all of you, I mean, firstly, if you're not in a trade union, you should be, and you should join. If you are in a trade union, you should get active within your union to try to make certain that organised labour is not locked into just an industrial straitjacket. You know, at the moment, there are left trade unions, militant trade unions, and industrial militancy is very, very important, especially, as James says, in the current climate of the cost of living crisis and the attacks on labour. And you just watch what Liz Truss will do in terms of trade union legislation. She will introduce it to make certain that public services, in fact private and public services, have to have minimum people working on it. I think it will be as high as 50%. She will try to shackle trade unions again. And the trade unions themselves need to understand that they can only survive and win for their members if they have a political strategy as well. I think there's a chance of that. I think there's a mood amongst workers. There's certainly a militant mood among workers at the moment. And what we need to tap into is that form of opposition. Because if you can link that in, and listening to Claire, it was fantastic that we've got people like Claire and that organisation fighting. And Claire's right, making fools of themselves sometimes, or dusting themselves down. Because the one thing is certain, you've put the issue of climate change on the agenda in a very serious way. Everybody now, including the Tories, talk about a Green New Deal. Well, what does that mean? And it only can be advanced if organisations do come together, find some form of common ground, and then work towards either attempting to save the Labour Party from Starmer and the people around him, the Starmeroids around him, and by the same time creating the real possibility of people saying, you know what, maybe we need to look elsewhere. And I think this book is a valuable contribution to that debate, so I would urge you to buy it. Thank you.
Something that both of you have done in different ways, but both very much done that, is bringing new people into politics, speaking politics in a language that people who are not previously politicised brings them into activity, whether that's social activity, activism, industrial activity, or into politics. Can you just talk a bit about the ways in which the left is often not very good at speaking a language that everyone speaks and understands? I mean, it's particularly like with climate, it's often in a this sort of weird technical register. It's hard for people to get what's going on. So if you could just talk about that bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, we were quite conscious about that at the start of XR, and one of the first things that we did was myself and some friends coming up with the name and talking about the identity and what it should look and feel like, and how to reduce this idea of these kind of three demands down to something that was like easy to understand, going really like massively against the kind of like postmodernist vibe, and saying something like tell the truth was something that I felt was quite like a useful device to cut through, because obviously there are subjective truths, but there is one truth, and it is that the climate crisis is fucking bad and no one's talking about it. And that, that's as close as I could get to the truth. And so then we talked about experimenting with language, and in my quite small kitchen, we made a 60-metre long banner that said climate change, we're fucked. And then we took that and hung it off Westminster Bridge. And that was like a really self-conscious experiment with language, to say like, everyone's saying this behind closed doors. Like, we went and occupied Greenpeace as one of the first things that we ever did. And everyone said, oh, if you do that, you won't make any friends, and everyone think you're a bit of a self-righteous idiot and blah, blah, blah. And actually we were quite really well received by the people that were there, and had a really nice, not very nice, but like a long conversation with them. And it was clear from that discussion that like those conversations were happening with them as well. They were happening in all the different NGOs, the people who are working on climate. They're in the pub or they're in their lunch break going, oh, we're really fucked, what are we going to do? And then they're going to the public and saying, you need hope, this is what you need to be told a happy story, otherwise you're going to like hide because I've decided how you're going to respond, and you probably need like some kind of encouragement that we might ban plastic straws or something that we can win, and then we can get over that, and then everyone will go yeah, and then we can carry on from there. I think we've made huge mistakes on communications on climate, and we can't afford to make them anymore. So that's one thing. But also, like, it's actually simpler to communicate to people in a way that they understand than you think. If you just really, really try and think about what it is that they need to feel from the communication that you're making. And that also feels like, particularly through the climate space, but I don't know if it's going on in other kind of like left organising spaces, but there seems to be a real understanding at the moment for a lot of people I speak to that you can tell people as much information as you like. There's often a mistake that people make in kind of organising, which is assuming there's an information deficit. You know, if you just make the good arguments about the economy, public ownership, the NHS, whatever it is, if you just make the good arguments, people are going to understand and they'll go, oh yeah, you're right, actually, we should totally do that. That's a really good idea. But if you go around saying like, you're fucked, your children are fucked, come and sit in the road, people go, okay, get it, yeah, I get it. I understand, do you know what I mean? And so it's the get Brexit done thing, right? It's like people go out and sort of find a way to like get to the way people feel, and then they go and throw these communications at them. And I think a lot of people on the left think there's something bad taste about that. And sure, there's like, you know, there's studies that suggest that leaning towards oversimplified communications, particularly ones that are exclusive or you know, socially kind of separating, yeah, that all can be like seen as a high risk kind of space. And we have I think a left often that feels very risk averse as well. They don't want to go and take a risk on a message that might be viewed as like a bad thing. But there are ways to communicate in honesty and with clarity and with simplicity, and to talk to people about how they feel, and don't allow the tabloids to be the only people that make people actually have some emotional reaction, because that's actually what a lot of the communications have done.
And it's also about raising the consciousness of people. That's why direct action is so very, very important, and incidentally always has been throughout our history since the Industrial Revolution. Direct action has always been critical in raising the consciousness of ordinary people. It's precisely why climate is now an issue. Everybody understands, especially young people. Young people get it because it has effectively been brought to the attention by environmentalists and groups taking direct action, closing down Waterloo Bridge rather than just handing out a few leaflets or chatting on a TV show. It's about raising that consciousness. It's the same in the trade union movement. I mean, there's lots of strikes at the moment. Let me tell you, I've been involved in hundreds of strikes in my time, 52 years representing working people. I've never yet met a worker who likes being out on strike. Nobody likes being out on strike. Why do people take strike action? Because they feel an injustice. And that is about honing in on that injustice and then having a consciousness about it, and they'll then respond to it. So of course, it's the same about what we're talking about here. How do we bring together groups? That's the real key. Great book. And the 4 kind of options that you put at the end, I thought was really interesting, especially the 2026 general strike. I thought, oh, I'll be around for that. But obviously, to achieve that, and very briefly, because I know we're going to have questions, and I always like an audience of listening to come in with questions, even criticisms, especially of trade unions. But when I was involved with the TUC, and there was a move for a general strike, I supported it, of course, as you would expect me to. But it's an interesting fact that virtually every union, including my own Unite, until I got it withdrawn from our rule book, has a line in the rule book that effectively says, yeah, you can take action for your objectives within the law. And of course, a general strike on anything would be classed as unlawful, which is why the vast majority of the TUC rejected the call for a general strike, with the honourable exceptions of a few unions that I'm sure you would know who they were. So we have to work on a number of issues. We have to work to create this left bloc based on a common programme. Lots of environmentalists, and within my own union, we have a fantastic debate and a discussion. But of course, a substantial number of working people, trade unionists, work in the oil industry, work in the energy industry, work in the automobile industry. And therefore, how you approach that, the nuclear industry, all my members in the nuclear industry, from Aldermaston, where they create the missile, to the transport workers who drive it up to Fastlane, to the workers in Barrow who build the submarine, are all Unite members, Unite GMB members. And when there's an issue about nuclear deterrence, there's a feeling, there's a panic that, well, the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, he'd do away with them all. And that's our jobs. Now, as you dig deeper, you will find that they are as much anti-nuclear as anybody else. But what they want is an alternative. They're the only ones, because lip service has been paid by the employers, as you would expect, and by governments, including the last Labour government, who did away with the Defence Diversification Agency. We had an agency that was supposed to look at the diversification. Labour did away with it. The only people who've taken it serious is the workers. So when you're looking for the left bloc and you're looking for an alliance, you have to understand the practical issues that you're dealing with and find common ground. And that can be done by raising people's consciousness.
Thanks. I'm going to ask you guys one more question and then open it up to the floor. We'll try to take questions in groups of 3. So if you prepare your questions now and sort of try to catch my eye whilst we hear the response to this question, which is those areas of resistance that I laid out earlier, going on strike, not paying things, occupying things and looking after each other. How do you think practically over the next few months those things can be linked up?
Well, next few months, the most important word that I've ever come across in all my time is confidence. If working people have confidence, anything is possible, anything. And the problem we have is that horrible word defeatism, James, because there was a long period through the 80s, we got slaughtered and we never won. And so although there was an initial fight back by working people, once defeat after defeat after defeat after defeat piled up, people become less interested in fighting because they don't think they can win. And so what you have to build is confidence. Now, currently, there are literally hundreds of strikes taking place. And most of them, certainly in my union, are being won. And it's building confidence. So the real task for us is to try to create. It's about, let me go back to Corbyn. We were told by the media that young people, it's great to see so many young people in the audience tonight, although given my age, probably most of us fall into that category. The fact of the matter, we were told, oh, young people are not interested in politics. They're not. Well, Corbyn proved them wrong. Hundreds of thousands of people were enthused, had the confidence to kind of engage. And that's precisely what we need at the moment. In this vacuum where there is no left leadership, none of us in this room at the moment can look anywhere for left leadership. Yes, there's leadership in particular small groups. I remember I met with UK Uncut. Do you remember that? This was six lads, I think they were, in a pub having a drink, complaining about something. And suddenly one of them said, why are we just complaining? Why don't we do something about it? They created an organisation that with social media, they were able to put 10,000 people on the street in any one time, occupying banks and stores and all the rest of it. We have to give people confidence, and that can only be done by building this left bloc, creating a leadership that can come out of that, which can challenge the Labour Party leadership to see whether that's flogging a dead horse or whether you can still breathe some life back into it, or whether you advance into something much more revolutionary.
Claire?
Well, I've been quite excited by what's happening because it's like, you know, lots and lots of people talking about not paying their bills is an act of civil disobedience, which I've not seen in my adult lifetime, like in that way, in this country. And it's a mode of action that we've also looked into, that people have explored the complexities and the difficulties, and you've all seen in the media all this, like, you know, personal risk stuff. Oh, you mustn't do it because it's very dangerous for you personally, and you know, maybe there's 100,000 people who are going to do it, but it's still going to get you in lots of trouble, and it's not going to be good, and so it's probably not worth it. And maybe you should think about doing something less than that, because we don't actually want you to do things like that, or realise that actually all of you could just do that. And if all of you do that, then there's real trouble for. But at the same time, having this, like, you know, emergence of all of this kind of strike action, and then lots of people saying they're going to come out on the streets and be, you know, making a big noise about the cost of living. And of course, like, the cost of living is mostly a crisis of people not having enough money and having really expensive bills. And why have they got really expensive bills? Climate intersects there. And so that's, you know, that's going to be, as I was saying earlier about like the ongoing destabilization, that's going to like continue on, like, because people have chosen not to prepare properly for all of these things that were completely predictable that were going to happen. Like, everyone's going to deal with them in real time, and that's unfortunate, but there's something exciting about the possibility of looking at the landscape of people who are ready to take seriously the need for urgent action to change course on climate, the need for urgent action for people to be able to have stable jobs and enough money to live on, and to be able to heat their homes and to be able to pay to feed their families, and all of this kind of stuff bubbling up at the same time. I think what's you know, it looks to me like an exciting space where finally it's not just people sort of like sitting around going, how could we encourage people to think about this as a strategy? To do a won't pay. When won't pay has can't pay along with it, then you've got, you know, an immediate sort of like charge of power. And it's also not a situation that's based entirely on a kind of sense of charity. And I think one of the things that's been problematic for us has been us coming out. We either come out and say, we're doing this for our children, our grandchildren, and people say, well, how dare you, because you should be doing it for people in the global south. And that's, you know, that's the wrong thing to say. Or you come out and say, we're doing it for other people elsewhere, and people go, well, it's not you, is it? And you've got no connection to them, you don't even know them, so you've got no legitimacy. So either side that you're on, you're like really struggling. When you're in this scenario where like the people of this country are suffering so much on so many fronts, and there's the heightened awareness of the climate and ecological crisis. And I will say, like, I've not said anything about biodiversity this evening, and that's not good form for me, because this is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. Our rivers are full of shit, our shoreline's covered in turd, and you know, and we're in an extinction event. So it's as serious as climate. But there's a possibility to sort of pull all this stuff together, and I don't think we're that far away from like the public imagination being able to join all these dots with a little bit of help. The media's not going to help us. So I think that's one of the main sort of monolithic problems in our society today that I can see, is that we need desperately to communicate with each other a lot and find like the most optimizing ways to do that. And particularly if the strikes are winning, I want to hear about it. Like, you know, I don't always think that we hear the good news. And Rebecca Solnit put it really beautifully when she said something like, you know, the problem with a lot of our struggle is that we can't celebrate because we act to prevent something. So you never sit around and go, well, do you remember that massive success, that road that never got built? Really good, wasn't it? Like, no one does that. So aside from the fact we're like a bunch of miserable, like complaining, infighting, narcissism of minor difference like leftists. It's also on top of it, like a lot of the celebrations that we should make are about shit that never happened. And so we've got to get much more serious, I agree, about like celebration and positivity and how that's actually a part of the strategy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll take them in groups of 3, and then maybe we'll chat a bit and then do another group of 3. And I think there's a roving mic. Yeah, Ollie's got a roving mic. So, right, hey, got a question?
Yeah, thanks. My question's to Len. So I completely agree with your point about trade unions being important, and I think the collective power of workers has been demonstrated in a way that people haven't seen, possibly like not in my lifetime, possibly in lots of the people in his lifetime, and it's really exciting. So I'm part of Extinction Rebellion as well, and work with Claire, and have tried really hard to reach out to trade unions and build a kind of a working dialogue, and it's been incredibly difficult. So do you have any advice on how to get sort of direct action groups to coalesce with unions in some kind of either public facing or non-public facing way? Because at the moment unions feel very like monolithic and difficult for anyone else to access or speak to.
Thank you. And gent over there? Yeah.
Hi, I guess this is for all 3 of you. You hear a lot about the NGOification of the left, or the capture of the left by bureaucratic interests, or a professional managerial class that's opposed to workers. And I spoke recently to some of the organisers of Don't Pay, and they said they wanted to get out ahead of Enough is Enough, and the NGO left, they called it, and they wanted to light the torch on a kind of explosive yellow vest style movement rather than anything with organisation, I suppose. Do you think these are valid concerns, or are people raising that kind of point getting the wrong end of the stick?
Great question. And one more. Gentleman over here.
Yeah, this is a question for James, really. I've spent the last 10 years of my life working for a Labour government in Wales, and I'm aware that if you do want to get state power, you have to plan for what you're going to do when you have it. We're 18 months away from the general election. I haven't got to the end of your book. I'd be grateful to have some sense of what the left needs to do in order to be effective once in power between now and May 2024.
Great. Well, why don't you take that?
Great questions. I mean, in relation to how do you engage with trade unions to talk about climate issues, I've just made the point before that a significant number of our members are working in polluted industries, and therefore there's a belief that somehow those that are environmentalists are against workers want to close down their industries. The good news is that many of the radical unions have their own environmentalist committees. I mean, I can talk about my own union, Unite. We have environmentalist committees. We have individuals who are in charge of trying to develop policy. We have policy. We call it a just transition. I mentioned before about the Green New Deal, and that's all about a just transition away from the areas that are causing pollution into other arenas without necessarily losing jobs. So you can obviously, first of all, you can join a union, you could join Unite, and you could make certain, because this idea that Unite or any union is a kind of monolith body, it is run by lay members. That's the truth of it. Of course, there's a bureaucracy. Very often there's a bureaucracy who has a clammy hand to kind of stem any proper debates, and you have to break through that. I've lived with that all my life. Some might regard me as a bureaucrat. I hope I never had a clammy hand. I always encourage debate and change. So you do have to kind of make that's very, very important that the environmentalist groups lock in with trade unions. Don't be just forced to one side, because there are people, members within those unions, who will welcome the debate. And it's vital so that you understand more the concerns that they may have. So, you know, I think that's something you should still see almost as a priority. Somehow we've got to press people, rattle cages, keep talking, keep demanding until someone says, okay, let's sit down. Let's sit down with somebody. I could give you a name in Unite that you could contact to sit down with and have a discussion with. And you should do that with other unions as well. As regards the question of is there a legitimacy? Yes, there is. And that's the point I was making before about how left groupings easily kind of want to fight with each other. You know, one group saying, well, you know, don't pay, we don't really want to get tied up with enough is enough. Enough is enough is a new kind of body that has grown up. I understand millions of people are signing up online for it, headed up by the likes of Dave Ward of the CWU. So these are false alternatives because there is common ground. And that's why this idea of a left bloc is so important, talking about the won't pay, can't pay. Well, you know, we've done this before. Rent strikes in my home city of Liverpool or Glasgow, Carrie Murphy's city, were successful because workers came together and they had the confidence. They had the confidence of the community to say, we're going to act as one. You know, at the moment, the danger of, you know, somebody in Burnley saying, well, I won't pay, and someone in Nottingham saying, well, I won't pay. Where's the link? What's the body? Hence the left bloc, something that is needed because that works. Look at Margaret Thatcher, the most powerful trade union prime minister that there's ever been, and yet unassailable. And yet she was brought down not by Neil Kinnock and the Labour Party, but by people power over the poll tax, because sufficient people came together and had the confidence to believe that they were part of a body. And that's precisely what organisations like Don't Pay, Enough is Enough, need to find common ground, not say, well, I don't want anything to do with them because it will dilute what we're doing. There's linkages if we can work at it.
Craig, do you want to come in?
Well, I just think what you've just said is sort of also points to a place where you have to, like, in order to be able to engage in some sort of like massive non-payment campaign, you have to suspend your own disbelief and say, like, I have this confidence. But of course, you never truly know whether everyone else is going to strike their rent right at the same time as you. And people, it's a collective action problem often gets described as. But it's also, like, I think, a massive crisis of the imagination. And where, and what's helpful about this book having 4 potential outcomes of, like, imagined futures, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, is that I think it's like, it's a very, in a very practical way, it's directly saying to the reader, like, use your imagination. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Do you know what I mean? And that's really necessary, because if I feel like, you know, when we started the movement, lots of people were like, oh yeah, have fun with that then. You know what I mean? A friend of mine, Robin, who's one of the co-founders, one of the youngest people, he quit university to come and, like, help start XR. It didn't exist. There was usually like 12 of us sitting in a road waiting to see if we got arrested and then to find out what would happen if we did. And he went to his tutors and said, I'm going to quit my degree, I'm going to go and start an open rebellion against the British state. And they were like, good luck with that then, see you later, Robin. You know, and, like, actually the only reason why I sort of said earlier, like, oh, you have to completely, like, be ready to go out and, like, ritually humiliate yourself again and again and again and keep on getting up and keep on going out is because, you know, it is like a mad thing to do. So, like, you know, saying to people think, oh, you're mad if you go and say, we're going to have to, like, take state power because otherwise, you know, shit's going to fall apart. And it's like, and everyone goes, oh yeah, but you can't really say that, can you? And it's like, so you have to sort of get get beyond that somehow. And I think, you know, when people unleash a bit of imagination, then they also can distract themselves from all of the narcissism of all their differences that usually is the thing that makes them have an argument and all stay at home.
Yeah, and what's important about that, direct action is fantastic, but the book points to, and it's maybe to your question as well, about where can we move that into state power, into the political arena. You know, at the moment, for many years, I think many of us have kind of admired the Green Party. But in terms of the concept of state power and in a political arena, they don't play a huge role. And we've got to kind of figure out through this left bloc and what emerges out of it in terms of a leadership that gives direction and gives confidence, something that will change that.
Just if I to respond to a couple of those as well, to the question about NGOisation, if I can split it in two, NGOisation is definitely a real thing because the left got, well, you know, like the working class left got smashed for 40 years, the left got, you know, hidden away in the seminar room and in NGOs, and that changes the way that the left speaks and what its incentives are, and that is a real thing. I don't think it plays out in the division between don't pay and enough is enough for what it's worth. I think Don't Pay is a really great imaginative campaign because it's taking individual misery and inability to pay your bills and it's collectivizing it into an act of resistance. And I hope that they do go on strike because there are already well over 1 million people, 1.5 million, maybe more than that, people that aren't paying their bills before they go up again. And if there is a strike and if it's big and if it's aggressive, that's 1.5 million people whose stress and debt and misery is turned into an active force for something good. So, and therefore I hope that other groups work with Don't Pay and Enough is Enough work with Don't Pay and so on. On the question about what we can do in Labour. So I disagree with Len. I think that Labour probably will win the next election with a minority government, not because they're not because they're putting forward anything, but I mean, let's be honest, they're putting forward absolutely nothing. But if living standards fall, as they have done for 12 years pretty much in a row, and then they're going to fall by, you know, I don't know, maybe 20% between now and the next election, it's very difficult to see how a government gets re-elected. But I don't see that being, you know, a majority Labour government. I think there are ways that, you know, there are some ways in the Labour Party through conference and so on, you can try to put in some pressure. But I think the biggest single thing will be trying to shift the ground on which politics sits. And I think the way in which we do that over, for example, the next few months is with making sure that strikes are big and they win, that they have support, that they join up, that Don't Pay is successful, that we put basically the extra parliamentary stuff links up and it touches base with where Labour is. And the left in the party and the good MPs and so on are able to take some strength from that. But I think really it's got to be about shifting the whole ground and focusing on the sort of the social terrain rather than the terrain in the party. But I think we've got we don't have time for 3 more, but we will have 3 more anyway. Sorry. Have one down here. But we'll answer the questions really quickly.
Thanks. You mentioned all of the different kind of groups that have come up over the last couple of years. So in particular, the Black Lives Matter movement was, happened with lots of other things, including like Extinction Rebellion. I feel like the right are really good at weaponizing supposed differences within kind of between immigrant communities and everyone else, basically. But there's also like far more in common than there is like separate between immigrant communities and everyone on the left. Because if you grew up in Ghana or Jamaica, you experienced firsthand like colonialism and the impact that it has on your nature, etc. So I wonder in your book, does it do much to like our conversations being had to kind of bridge those gaps and kind of highlight the more that we have in common than not. And I guess part of that weaponisation is, you know, with like the Nationality and Borders Bill, right? Like I would definitely be less inclined to get arrested, for example, because I wouldn't want to be deported to somewhere that I've never lived, you know what I mean? So I'm wondering like what conversations are being had in that realm.
Great question. There was one here, and then
yeah, state power has been mentioned a lot, and I kind of agree with the points that you made. I just want to hear you all elaborate a bit more on it, because I think often the left's view of state power is mass-based politics to a party to a cabinet. I think anybody who's worked in government knows that state power is way blurrier. And so kind of what's the more nuanced approach to state power? You know, the Conservative Party is older, that has a lot more embedded relationships and influence over the other bits of state power, the civil service, the military, the media, various kind of local government institutions. So kind of how could the left pay attention to that and kind of pluralise its approach to influencing state power? Because that's useful when you're not in government as well, but it also sets you up when you are in government.
excellent question. Right, one more. Who's the keenest for the one? Oh, right at the back, standing up. That's really key.
Hello. I think Claire mentioned about the food system, and I just wondered if you could talk more about that, please, because I think the food system reflects how like, market capitalism doesn't work, and yet we don't tend to hear much about it, especially in the run-up to COP27. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Claire, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I'm not a food security expert, right? But my understanding is that we have a globalised food system that works on just-in-time delivery, where the people I've spoken to in depth about it are like, it's like an elastic band. The system is stretched really tight, really tight, and it's very easy to like just break it. Because if you have like crop failure over here and over here in different bread baskets in the world, then you immediately have an enormous problem, because all of the cheap food that like lots of our societies are based on in more privileged parts of the world is, falls away and the prices shoot up, and then, all shit breaks loose. So at the moment we've got India are not exporting their wheat crops now because they've had terrible seasons for growing. There are British farmers who are saying that they may consider not putting seeds in the ground or quitting what they're doing because they don't want to do it anymore. What exactly happens, I don't know. If loads of farmers can't get the insurance that I talked about earlier or just think, fuck this, it's rubbish, I don't want to do this anymore, then where do you get your food from? And obviously George Monbiot's just released a book, which I haven't read yet, about using lots of different ways of making food, precision fermentation and corn type things. But it seems to me for sure the system is unstable. For sure, like everything, like you say, markets are entirely dependent on it. For sure, if we wanted to be prepared for the future, we could be thinking about how to grow things that don't rely on rain-fed agriculture. But to my knowledge, we don't have like an enormous push on that. And then for sure, we have to stop eating so much meat, even if you don't disagree with the animal rights aspect of that. Like methane is one of the most terrifying issues of our time, and nobody's talking about it. And animals burp and fart all the time, and it's going to kill everyone. So, especially if you keep them in a factory, and there's millions of them. So the food system really like needs urgent attention, and I think it's a really easy way in to talk to people about what needs to be done, because everyone cares about food. And I saw that as a fashion person when the 2008 crash happened. There was ethics and sustainability in fashion and textiles was growing. It was also growing around food. Organic food was like growing as well. But when the crash happened, people stopped buying so much into like ethical textiles and consumer products, but they were still interested in like putting like clean, organic and ethical things in their mouth and in their bodies. And so it holds a special place in the sort of spectrum of consumer kind of markets, really, definitely. I think we really need to sort of talk much more seriously about preparing a more shock-resistant food system, and that doesn't mean like drought-resistant seeds that Monsanto own and sue you for not using properly. It means like people really trying to make food systems resilient and diverse, and probably that means lots of people need to sort of collectively own those solutions as well, because we've also got this sort of massive corporate capture of big ag, which I think is probably makes it hugely sort of even more vulnerable than it already is in some ways. And then on top of that, nobody knows how to run the agricultural system with no fossil fuels, and we have to get off them completely. So that's also quite a frightening but interesting thought, because you can't make the petrochemicals industry disappear and then have a fertilizer industry. Big problem. So that's, you know, in itself, that the enormity of that, I think, it makes an interesting space if you can not be frightened.
Well, the two questions at the front from the sister and the brother here are really, really good questions. To answer yours directly, are people talking to one another? I don't think they are. And I think that's why I mentioned before that I see this book as a clarion call to those groups who are engaged in particular pigeonholes at the moment, to start to reach out to one another and to try and recognise the kind of sinister explanation I gave before about moving the Labour Party, traditional voice of ordinary working people, to a mirror image of the Democrats. People have to recognise that. If I take two quick examples, Momentum, that James was involved in creating, fantastic organisation as far as I was concerned. Whether they've lost their way at the moment, I'm not sure. CLPD, Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, a group that I joined back in the 70s. It was difficult to get the pair of them to talk to one another. And there were issues, and there's personalities, and we have to overcome that. And your point about, well, are you talking to one another? That is what, for me, this book is all about. Nobody's going to wave a magic wand here and get everybody to love each other and we'll all come together. It needs to be hard work, but it is a valid call, because that's the only way to deal with state power. Of course, you know, the idea that I remember when I was a lot younger, there was a TV program called A Very British Coup, and Harry Perkins was the Labour Prime Minister. We used to walk around with badges on at Labour Party conferences saying vote for Harry Perkins. And it was a demonstration of, do you really think that these people are going to give up power because, you know, a few million people voted for you? No, we rule. We have power. And therefore, we'll take it from you even if you democratic. Now, if we consider state power and what's stacked against us, we will slip in to the defeatism and how can we defeat these people? But the truth is that people power can come together in common ground. So at the moment, the parliamentary road that we have, and Ralph Miliband spent his life explaining that you couldn't achieve socialism through the parliamentary road. And his two sons set about for their life, proving he was right. But the interesting thing is that's what we have at the moment. So we have to challenge in the political arena. We have to try to seek the levers of power. And we have to draw from the inspiration of Corbyn and his team, who in a short period of time came that close. And that's what should enthuse us, and we should respond as positively as we can to what will develop, because I think, I don't know whether it was James who made the point before, or he was quoting one of the philosophers in his book, something will happen. The political arena is so volatile at the moment that anything can happen, and good men and women have got to be prepared and brave enough to seize the moments when it does happen.
Thanks so much, and yeah, great questions, and also thank you for asking them, because the book talks about both of those things, so that's I mean, nice for me right now. So I write a bit about how the state weaponizes these things. Precisely, the Churchill statue became a key focal point, even though there was no threat to the Churchill statue during the BLM protests, or when there's a protest against the violence at the Sarah Everard vigil, and they went and boarded up Churchill and they put the police all around. So there's this amazing photo of the police guarding Churchill as if that's what was going on. All these women were there to attack the Churchill statue, and it does that very well. Now, they're always going to have the power to do that. They're always going to have the power of spectacle, to shift attention, to fly RAF jets over the channel and say there's this huge crisis of people crossing the channel. They can always shift attention. But we can also do the same thing. And I think more that we do need to have conversations. We do need to work out how we come together, how there's more in common and all of those things. But I think also we need to show that. And I think there are a whole number of ways in which you can have a spectacle which drags the media's attention and social media attention and people's attention to issues, which shows in practice different groups of people with slightly different interests and demands are all working on the same thing, whether that's whatever the top line of that is. And I think learning how to do that, which involves building movements and getting them to work together, is an extremely important part of understanding state power. Because yes, you're right, state power is not we do quite well in the electoral sphere, we win an election, then we have a cabinet government, and then we sort of sit back and the civil service sort of neutrally carry out, oh yes, you want to take stuff away from rich people and give it to everyone else. Yes, yeah, well, sure, we'll do that straight away. Obviously, that's not what's going to happen. The establishment, those moneyed interests and so on, have massive influence on the state through lobbying, through connections, through all sorts of things. And if we are to have real state power, not just have a government that we support that's in office, but have real state power that's popular power, we need to, at the very least, balance out their ability to lobby, but actually to have much more. So yeah, in the book there's some, I mean, it's a tiny little book, but there's some stuff about in and against the state and Miliband and Panitch and so on and so forth. I think, in order to be successful in the here and now, I think we need to have this movement building and movement uniting approach. I think in order to seize an opportunity when it arises, we need to do that to build power. And in order to have sufficient power to be able to do anything, if we ever do take the state, we need to be doing that. So regardless of what could happen, that through line is all there, which is why I make the argument in the book. Thank you very much. I think we have to leave.